Snow tore across the mountains like shards of glass, the wind screaming down the ridges with a voice older than man. A woman stumbled through that white fury, her coat shredded, her breath a faint vapor swallowed by the storm. Her fingers clutched a silver locket pressed tight against her chest, a desperate relic of something warm in a world turned merciless. Blood marked her path, drops vanishing almost as soon as they fell. She fell to her knees, gasping, the cold biting deep enough to still her heartbeat. "Don't save me," she whispered to the storm, her voice breaking. "I'm already dying." Far off, hooves cracked through the snow. A lone rider emerged from the storm's veil, a giant of a man on a dark horse, beard thick with frost, shoulders like the walls of a cabin. His eyes, pale and steady, searched the blinding white until they found her collapsed form. He dismounted without a word. The horse snorted steam into the wind as he knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Skin pale, pulse weak. For a moment he just stared, torn between instinct and something older, something that hurt. Then he lifted her, her body light as snowdrift against his chest, and carried her toward the dim line of pine trees below. The cabin waited deep in the timbered hollow, half buried under the storm. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, the fire had long since died. He kicked the door open, carrying her inside. The room was cold and still, filled with the scent of old wood and ashes. He laid her near the hearth, then went to work, splitting kindling, striking a flint, coaxing flame from stubborn coals until light bloomed and shadows leapt back from her face. Her lashes fluttered once, twice. She shivered violently. He poured whiskey from a bottle and dabbed it on her cracked lips. When she coughed weakly, he muttered, "Still fightin'. That's good." Her eyes opened a sliver, unfocused but alive. She flinched at the sight of him, the size of him, the rough lines, the scar along his jaw. "Don't," she gasped. "Please?" He shook his head. "Ain't here to harm you, miss. Storm would have done that already." His voice was deep, weathered, quiet as falling snow. He stripped off his coat and draped it over her, then stirred the fire higher. The heat spread slowly through the cabin, melting the ice that clung to her hair. Outside, the wind clawed at the walls like something hungry. He moved with methodical calm, boiling water, tearing old linen for bandages, tending to a gash on her arm. Each motion carried a sense of grim ritual, a man long used to doing what must be done. When he touched her wrist to check her pulse, he froze for an instant. There was warmth there, faint but stubborn. He looked at her face again, searching for something familiar but finding only a stranger clinging to life. Hours passed before she stirred again. Her voice came softer, steadier this time. "You should have left me. They'll come back." He didn't look up from the fire. "Then I'll be here when they do." She blinked, trying to read him. "You don't even know who I am." He finally turned, eyes catching the flicker of the flames. "Don't need to. You were dying. That's enough." She studied him through the firelight. His clothes were rough, buckskin patched and smoke-stained. The rifle leaned by the wall looked like it hadn't been used in months, yet his hands bore fresh calluses, as if he never stopped preparing for something. There was a loneliness about him heavier than the storm itself. She sensed it in the way he avoided her eyes, in the silence that followed every word. "Why'd you come out there?" she whispered. "Storm woke me," he said simply. "Figured it was time to listen." "To what?" He glanced toward the shuttered window where the wind wailed like a mourning woman. To what the world was trying to bury. The fire snapped between them. She closed her eyes again, exhaustion overtaking fear. He sat back against the wall, the weight of his rifle resting across his knees. Every so often he checked the door, as if expecting shadows to form into men. Outside, the storm began to ease. The silence that followed was thicker than noise. He listened to her breathing, shallow but steady, and felt something move in his chest, slow and painful like thawing ice. He hadn't shared a roof with another soul in years. He'd chosen these mountains to forget, not to find. But now a stranger lay beneath his coat, and her whispered plea echoed in his head louder than the storm. As dawn broke, the world turned from silver to pale gold. Light crept through the cracks in the walls, dust motes rising in the warmth. She slept still, hand curled around the locket she'd nearly died protecting. He leaned closer and saw the faint engraving on it, nothing clear, just the shape of a child's face worn by time. He didn't open it. Some things weren't his to know. He rose, pulled his coat back on and stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp, the sky opening wide above the frozen peaks. The snow stretched endless in all directions, clean and merciless. He looked toward the trail she'd come from, a narrow scar winding down into the valley. Somewhere out there danger still moved. When he returned inside, the fire had burned low, but she was awake, eyes on him. "You saved me," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No. You're still breathing, means you saved yourself." She smiled faintly, the first sign of warmth between them. He didn't smile back, but something in his eyes softened, a flicker of recognition, like two ghosts realizing they'd both been lost in the same wilderness. The wind outside had died at last, but inside, a new kind of storm had begun to stir, silent and human and impossible to turn away from. Morning came softly, the kind that crept rather than arrived. Pale sunlight slid between the gaps in the cabin's logs, tracing thin bars of gold across the floorboards. The woman stirred under a wool blanket, the faint scent of smoke and pine filling her lungs. Her eyes blinked open to the sound of the fire's quiet hiss and the rhythmic scrape of a knife being honed. The man sat near the doorway, a slab of wood in his lap, shaping it into kindling. His movements were steady, his silence deliberate. She tried to sit, wincing as her shoulder throbbed. "You should rest," he said without turning. His voice carried the same weight as the mountains outside, low, immovable. She managed to push herself upright, clutching the blanket closer. "You haven't told me your name," she said. He looked up, eyes calm, unreadable. "Names don't matter much out here." Her gaze drifted to the window. Beyond the frosted glass, the world was all white and still, except for the drifting smoke from the chimney. "It matters to me," she murmured. He set the knife aside. "Call me whatever makes you feel safe." She studied him, the lines around his eyes, the scar under his beard, the quiet grief in his posture. "You don't look like a safe man." He nodded once. "Ain't one." He ladled broth from a pot over the fire, the smell of venison and herbs filling the room. She took the bowl from him, hands trembling slightly from the cold. "You hunt?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "These days I mostly keep things alive." The words hung between them, almost fragile. She sipped slowly, the warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time she could study the room, a rifle leaning by the wall, a coat patched with care, shelves lined with dried meat and herbs. Everything was worn but tended. He lived like a man expecting no company, yet ready to survive forever. Her eyes caught the faint scar near his collarbone, visible where his shirt hung loose. "You've been shot," she said quietly. He didn't answer, just returned to sharpening his knife. She tried again. "Did you fight in the war?" He gave a dry laugh, one without humor. "No, ma'am. My wars were smaller, but they left their marks just the same." The cabin crackled with the sound of burning pine. She set the bowl down and rubbed her wrist, where a faint bruise ringed her skin. He noticed. "Them men who chased you, what were they after?" She hesitated. "Something I wouldn't give." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Money?" "No," she said. "Something they didn't earn the right to touch." He didn't press further. He simply nodded, as though that answer was enough. The day stretched quiet. He stepped outside to split wood, the sound of the axe steady and sure. She watched from the doorway, blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. The air smelled of sap and cold iron. He moved with the kind of precision that comes from habit rather than thought, each swing clean and final. For a long moment she just watched, realizing she hadn't seen another human move without malice or haste in months. When he came back inside, his breath still clouding in the chill, she asked softly, "Why live up here alone?" He placed the axe against the wall. "Because everything I ever cared for burned away. Easier to talk to trees, they don't lie or ask questions." His tone wasn't bitter, just factual, and that honesty struck her harder than pity ever could. Night came early, shadows thickening in the corners. The fire cast amber light on the rough walls, painting the room in shifting warmth. She sat near the hearth, sewing a torn sleeve from his coat with trembling fingers. "You don't have to," he said. "I need to do something," she replied. "Can't just sit and feel useless." He watched her hands move, slow, careful, determined. "You ain't useless," he said finally. "Storm didn't kill you. That counts for something." They ate in silence, two strangers bound by necessity. When thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, she flinched. He noticed, glanced at her, but said nothing. The next flash of lightning lit the cabin through the cracks, silvering her face. She looked fragile and fierce at once, fear layered over endurance. He reached for her hand without thinking, rough fingers steadying hers. "Ain't nothing out there that can break through these walls tonight," he said. She nodded, gripping his hand tighter than she meant to. For a long while neither spoke. The storm outside passed like a ghost, and the air grew still again. She leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling her eyelids low. I don't even know why you helped me, she murmured. Because I couldn't watch another soul disappear, he said. Already done that once. Her gaze lifted, but his eyes were on the fire, distant and heavy. When she fell asleep, he stayed awake, feeding the flames, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the blanket. Something about the sound of her breathing steadied him, like a rhythm he'd forgotten. He thought of the grave on the far ridge, the one he hadn't visited since the first snowfall of last year, and the promise he'd failed to keep. He wondered if saving this woman was punishment or mercy or maybe both. Outside, snow began again, faint and quiet. The man stood, stretched his back and glanced at the door. He thought he saw movement among the trees, only for a moment, but the darkness swallowed it. When he turned back to the fire, its glow reflected in his eyes like the first light of hope he'd let himself feel in years. He sat again, resting his hands near the heat. Behind him, the wind sighed against the walls, almost gentle now, like it had softened for the two souls within. The woman murmured something in her sleep, a sound that might have been a name. He didn't ask who. Instead, he whispered into the quiet, "Rest easy. You're safe here tonight." And though he didn't quite believe it himself, he made sure the fire burned bright enough to make it true. By morning, the air had turned sharper, the kind that stung the lungs and warned of change. The woman woke to find the man already outside, smoke from his breath mingling with the fog between the trees. She wrapped his coat around her shoulders and stepped into the doorway, the boards creaking beneath her feet. He was crouched low, examining something in the snow. When he looked up, his face had lost its usual calm. "Boot tracks," he said quietly. "Fresh." Her heartbeat quickened. "Could be hunters." He shook his head. "Too many. For maybe 5 men. Heavy steps, moving in a line. They weren't hunting deer." He followed the trail with his eyes, then glanced back toward the cabin. "You sure you told me everything about the men?" She hesitated, fingers gripping the doorframe. "They weren't just thieves. They ran a camp up near Red Hollow. Took in travelers, promised shelter, then robbed them blind. I ran before they could decide what to do with me. Took something they thought was theirs." "What?" Her gaze dropped to the locket around her neck. "This. It's all I had left of my child. They called it cursed." He studied her, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Then they'll keep coming, till they get it back." "Then you should go," she said quickly. "They'll kill you for helping me." He rose to his full height, snow scattering from his boots. "If I was the running kind, I'd never be lasted here." The day grew darker as clouds gathered again. They worked in silence, boarding the windows, stacking firewood near the door. Each sound, the hammer's ring, the creak of wood, felt louder in the still air. He handed her his old pistol. "Can you shoot?" "Enough to hit what's close," she replied. "That'll do." As afternoon sank toward dusk, he saddled his horse and rode a short distance down the ridge, following the tracks. The forest was a maze of shadows, each one stretching long between the pines. When he reached the clearing near the frozen stream, he saw smoke curling from a far slope. He dismounted, crouching low, and spotted figures, 4 men around a small fire, rifles glinting dull beneath their coats. He heard laughter carried by the wind. One voice rose above the others. "The girl's gotta be dead by now. But the boss says her trail led west. Big bastard's cabin ain't far." The man froze. The sound of that voice, it wasn't just any outlaw. It was a voice he'd heard once before, years ago, the night his home burned and his brother's blood stained the snow. The same rasping drawl that haunted every dream since. He returned to the cabin by nightfall, his face set hard, eyes darker than before. She met him at the door, sensing what he'd found. "They're close," she said. "Closer than I hoped," he answered. "And I know one of them." Inside, he cleaned his rifle, checking the barrel by the firelight. She watched from across the room, her fingers restless against her lap. "You've fought before," she said softly. "Once," he muttered. "Didn't end well." "Your scar." He nodded. "My brother tried to save me. Took the bullet meant for him instead." The firelight trembled, throwing restless shadows across the walls. "You think this is about revenge?" she asked. He shook his head. "It's about endings. Some debts don't get buried easy." Outside, wolves howled, distant but near enough to stir unease. The woman moved closer to the hearth, clutching the pistol he'd given her. "If they find us, I can help." He looked at her, really looked, and saw no fear in her eyes now, only a quiet resolve. "You've already done more than you know," he said. Night deepened. He doused the lamp, leaving only the glow of embers. The cabin fell silent except for the wind sighing against the logs. He took first watch by the door, rifle resting across his knees. Every sound, the groan of wood, the shift of snow on the roof, felt amplified. Somewhere between wakefulness and memory, he saw flashes of fire, his brother's voice calling out, the same cruel laughter echoing over smoke. He blinked and the vision faded, leaving only the woman's soft breathing behind him. Near midnight, the horse outside snorted, uneasy. He rose silently and peered through a crack in the shutter. The moon cast silver over the snow, and for an instant, he saw movement, 3 shapes slipping between trees, rifles glinting faintly. He turned, motioning for her to stay quiet. She stood, heart hammering, the pistol trembling in her grip. The air inside thickened with dread. Then came a sound, a crunch of boots near the porch. The door shuddered once, twice, then went still. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. He raised his rifle, eyes fixed on the shadowed window. The next instant, a shot exploded through the wood, splintering the wall inches from his head. He fired back instinctively, the report echoing through the valley. Glass shattered, smoke filled the room. She ducked low, clutching the pistol close to her chest. A second figure burst through the doorway, face half covered by a scarf. The man swung the rifle stock hard, sending the intruder crashing into the table. The woman fired once, her bullet finding its mark. Another shadow fled into the snow outside, shouting. The night erupted with gunfire, flashes lighting the trees. When the last echo faded, only the wind remained. The floor was littered with splinters and spent shells. She looked to him, blood running down his arm from a fresh wound, but he was still standing. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, breath coming slow. "They'll be back," she whispered. He nodded. "And next time they won't come in the dark." She moved closer, pressing cloth to his arm to stop the bleeding. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. "Why keep helping me? You could have left, let the storm or them finish it." He met her gaze, eyes tired but steady. "Because the night I lost everything, no one came." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire hissed, faint and low. Then she said softly, "Then we'll face it together." He gave a small nod. "Together?" he echoed. Outside, the snow began again, falling quiet and steady, erasing footprints, covering the blood. But both of them knew the peace wouldn't last. Far beyond the ridge, the rest of the men would see the smoke by dawn. And when they came, the storm inside that cabin would be waiting for them. Snow swallowed the valley in silence as dawn crept through torn clouds, casting the land in pale gold. The giant mountain man stood outside the half-collapsed cabin, his shoulders bowed beneath the storm's weight, eyes fixed on the woman lying inside by the fire. Her breaths came shallow and uneven, steam rising from her lips like ghosts leaving her body. He had carried her through 2 days of blizzard and blood, every step echoing the vow he'd made that night. He would fight death before letting it take her. Inside, the fire had dimmed to a low hum, shadows crawling along the log walls. Her name had become a whisper in his thoughts, though she'd barely spoken it herself. He knew little about her, just fragments she'd muttered through fever. A brother lost in a raid. A town burned. A man who left her bleeding in the snow. But he didn't need the rest to understand. He had seen too much of the world's cruelty to need words to recognize it in someone's eyes. He crouched beside her, pressing his rough palm to her forehead. "Still fightin'," he murmured, voice a blend of awe and sorrow. He fed the fire with broken chair legs and his last handful of kindling, watching the flame climb like a wounded animal refusing to die. The air smelled of pine smoke, damp wool, and faint traces of her hair, wild honey and winter wind. When she stirred, her eyes fluttered open. "You should have left me," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, brittle as frost. He met her gaze, calm but unyielding. "Ain't in me to leave a dyin' soul behind." She tried to smile but failed. "You don't even know my name." "Names don't change nothin'. You're still here. That's what matters." For a while, silence filled the cabin. The blizzard outside had eased to a whisper, flakes drifting lazily past the open doorway. He checked his rifle, though the iron was cold and nearly useless from the moisture. He wasn't sure who might still be out there hunting her, or him, but the tracks he'd seen near the ridge yesterday told him the danger hadn't passed. As night returned, the wind rose again, dragging long, mournful howls through the trees. She tried to sit up but winced, clutching her ribs. He knelt, steadying her gently. The feel of her trembling hand in his, the smallness of it against his scarred fingers, ignited something fragile in him. He had lived years without softness, surviving by instinct and grit, but now that same instinct urged him to protect her at any cost. "Why'd they come after you?" he asked quietly. She looked toward the flames, shadows painting sorrow on her face. They took everything I had. I ran. Guess I was too slow. He didn't press further. Her voice carried enough pain to tell the rest. Later, he stepped outside, letting the snow sting his face as he scanned the treeline. The moonlight broke through ragged clouds, revealing movement, 3 riders far off, black shapes weaving through the pines. His jaw tightened. They had found them. He moved fast, pulling the rifle strap across his chest, checking his knife, and dragging a half-broken sled to the doorway. She watched him from inside, fear flickering in her eyes. They're here, ain't they? He nodded once. We'll move at dawn. Downriver, past the canyon. Can't stay. You can't fight them all. Maybe not, he said, voice low, but I can make sure you get through that pass. The storm thickened again, erasing sound and shape. He sat by the door all night, gun across his knees, the fire painting his face in weary gold. She drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring half-dreams. Once she whispered something that broke him quietly, "Don't save me. I'm already dyin'." He turned his head toward her, eyes glinting like steel in the firelight. "You don't get to decide that alone," he said almost to himself. At dawn the world was white and hollow. They set out, her wrapped in his coat, clinging to his back as he guided the mule through the snow. Every sound was sharp, the crunch of hooves, the distant crack of a rifle. He spun, returning fire, the shot echoing across the valley. One rider fell. The others scattered, then regrouped, shadows flanking the canyon path. He knew this place. The cliffs narrowed ahead, and once through, the river's frozen spine led to safety. But the riders closed in fast. Bullets hissed through the air, biting into stone. The mule screamed and stumbled. He lifted her from the saddle, shouting for her to run, but she didn't. She turned, grabbed his revolver from his belt and fired, once, twice, until the echoes faded and the last rider slumped into the snow. When silence came again, it was heavy and sacred. He looked at her, standing there, hair wild, breath trembling, blood seeping from a graze on her arm, and he knew she was no helpless soul. She was life itself, stubborn and burning. They made it through the pass by noon. The wind softened, and the first light of sun kissed the canyon walls in gold. He collapsed beside the riverbank, laughing breathlessly. She knelt beside him, hand pressed to his chest. "You kept your word," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Told you I'd fight death." She brushed snow from his beard, eyes glistening. "And if death comes for you?" He looked at her for a long moment, voice rough as gravel. "Then I reckon it'll have to fight me again tomorrow." They stayed there, wrapped in silence, until the sun broke fully through. In that golden quiet, something wordless passed between them, not a promise, not even love, but understanding. Two souls, scarred and wandering, who had found warmth in a world made of cold. As the story's echo fades, imagine the crackle of a campfire, the hiss of embers in the dark. A voice leans close, rough and low, like the wind over the plains. "Sometimes the wild don't kill you, it just tests if your heart's still worth savand." The fire pops once and the storyteller chuckles softly. If that tale warmed you a little, partner, stick around. There's always another story waiting in these hills.